Which players on the Florida Panthers jobs is the safest? We're going to discuss that and more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Wednesday, August 7th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at Monoman12, follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. So, Panther fans, grateful to be back here for another edition of the show to once again celebrate the Summer of Champions here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But, for today's episode, I really wanted to go more of a discussion on today's show, mostly because of where we fall on the calendar on this day. So what happened on this day 4 years ago? And on this day, the Florida Panthers were eliminated from the Stanley Cup bubble in Toronto in 4 games against the New York Islanders, where there didn't seem a sense of direction here. So 4 days to the day, and now looking back at it, now the Florida Panthers are Stanley Cup champions. And here to discuss more of this topic and more on today's edition of the show, not only this topic, but where the cup has been lately. And in the last segment, we're going to discuss the top 5 safest Panthers for coming into next season and beyond. And here to join me to do so, another edition of Winans Wednesday, Jacob Winans. Welcome back to the show, my friend.
Yeah, thank you for having me as always. Love the topics for today. This should be a fun one.
Yeah, man, 4 years to the day where, but even before that, you think back 5 months prior to it, where everyone's world went through a little bit of a spiral a little bit. It's crazy to think now. If any of you listeners are really into investing in the stock market right now, the stock market is down, and really at the time with COVID, that's where really a lot of changes started too with that part of everything. And now with in going back into hockey and everything, where the Florida Panthers eliminated, the final score was 5-1 against the New York Islanders. In that series, the Islanders equaled the Panthers in power play goals, 4 of them each. The Panthers didn't put more than 28 shots on goal in any of their 4 games against Semyon Varlamov and the Islanders. And you look at the roster that the Panthers had in that one. Huberdeau, Barkov, Mike Hoffman on the top line. Sometimes you would put Evgeny Dodonov there. There was also the mix-in of putting in on the top line there, Eric Halla there too. That last game right before they were eliminated was an 11F7D game that Joel Quenneville put out there for the Panthers. Mark Pysyk was obviously the hybrid that you could put on the forward and defense lines. Frank Vetrano didn't play the last 2 games of the bubble. Mike Matheson was scratched. So there was a lot of roster questions for the Panthers then too. And from that to it, for Dale Tallon's now tenure coming to an end after that game, and then going into a new direction too. And then Bill Zito comes into the mix, trades for Patrick Hornquist, who got his day with the cup with his family, a very low-key day for him back in Sweden, where he had his kids having candy inside the cup. And then the drafting of Anton Lundell and everything after that. To think now, looking back, now the Panthers got their goal of winning a Stanley Cup championship. I was distraught. I was discouraged at that time. And I remember just staying at home. Obviously, I was working remote at the time, but still enjoying some hockey in my own home. A lot of us were home then. But just discuss your feelings then, Jacob, when the Panthers were season ended at that time to now the big turnaround for this team.
Yeah, I would. To be completely honest with you, I was pretty numb to it at the time, and which is crazy for me to say. Just being the diehard Panthers fan that I am, at the time it was like I had no expectations of them to win that series, which was an unfortunate thing to say at the time because we had been promised so much in that Dale Tallon era, and just it just hadn't come to fruition. Some lowlights, if you think about it, that stick out from that mini series there. Sergei Bobrovsky was not good, and there were a lot of questions about his contract immediately at the conclusion of that season. He was not good in that series. You think about the defense was kind of in shambles. You had Anton Strawman on that defense, and he struggled. Keith Yandel was constantly struggling on that defense. Mike Matheson struggled mightily, got himself healthy scratch. Brady Keeper ended up getting into a game with almost zero experience. They had to turn to Brady Keeper off the taxi squad or off the reserve list there, and he had to play. It was not a great time there. And looking back at that team, that was the year that the Panthers had Brian Boyle. I believe he scored in that series against the Islanders. I think he might have had a goal in their lone win. Frank Petrano got scratched. Brian Boyle was playing. Looking back, the fourth line wasn't good. They had odd combinations. Dominic Toninato was getting lots of fourth line minutes, and that, I mean, no disrespect to Toninato, he gave us some pretty cool moments in his short stint with the Panthers, but that's not a fourth liner that's making an impact in a playoff series against the Islanders, who were really, really good at that time. Let's give them their credit where it's due. The Islanders were a very good team at that time, and they were contending for the Eastern Conference Final every year. If not for running into the Tampa buzzsaw a couple of times, it's a good bet they would have won, or at least made it to a Stanley Cup in that little window they had there. So it was a good team they were playing against, but that team was ill-equipped. There was no forecheck. Barkov and Huberdeau still hadn't answered questions about playoff performance. Physicality was lacking. And one thing that stood out to me it wasn't the final game, but it was the second to last game, the game the Panthers staved off elimination. Erik Haula blocked a shot. He took a shot off the ankle. He blocked a shot, got in front of one on the penalty kill. And the camera panned to the bench, and Aaron Ekblad absolutely lost his mind celebrating. He could not believe that Erik Haula dove in front of a shot and blocked it and sacrificed his body. And I think that was very telling at the time, that the Panthers did not know how to win, because you would of course you cheer your teammates blocking a shot. It's customary. You stick tap, but the current Panther group, that everyone is willing to do that. Everyone's throwing their body on the line. Everyone is doing the little things that win games. And when Erik Haula blocked that shot, it was like Aaron Ekblad had never seen anyone do that before in a playoff game, and that was very telling during that series. So. They've come a long way, and looking back, we're glad they lost because that set this whole build in motion.
Yeah, and to think that even looking at that roster, how Bill Zito was able to get off the contracts of Brett Connolly, I mean, that was two separate trades, which the Chicago Blackhawks that brought Lucas Carlson into the mix. Unfortunately, you had to put Henrik Borgstrom into a trade there. Same thing with Brett Connolly as well. That was a big offseason that was supposed to be like the kind of not necessarily the last hoorah, but a little bit of a last gasp for Dale Tallon at that time, as he was going into a full decade there, and then just turning it around after for that, and then for the Panthers' ability to just recover after. I mean, the Bukestad and McCann trade ended up working well in the long run. We didn't see really immediate an immediate result from it, but still for the Panthers, even turning it around for multiple first round picks that didn't work out in Tippett, who we saw traded away, and even the Panthers recovering after giving up so much, getting nothing out of Denisenko. Mike Matheson, obviously big one for Patrick Hornquist there. I kind of see how the Panthers are able to, even though they were eliminated in 2022 and they're trying to get over the hump too, and how and even bouncing back after. It kind of reminds me, there's actually a football equivalent to that, is the San Francisco 49ers. They traded a lot for Trey Lance, and they're still in a contention window too, even coming into this year in the NFL. That was the Panthers after 2022. and there was still a little bit of question marks on whether they could actually get to the ultimate prize. Obviously, the trade for Tkachuk, big difference. And honestly, looking back at it, it was basically a miracle that just the fact of Matthew Tkachuk's available, how late in free agency, and that the Panthers already made their moves where they were at the time of the buyout of Keith Yandle. At the time of Dale Tallon's last season, the big commitments were already there with Bob and Yandle there, where you couldn't even go scorched earth rebuild. You had to try to patch it on and put some band-aids here and there with the team.
Yeah, Bill Zito really walked into a tough situation because what he inherited, it wasn't like this was a ready-made product for him to just put the finishing touches on. This was there was a little bit of teardown required there. You think Mike Matheson, that no, he has developed into a really good player. He's solid. He's found his footing, and I'm really, really happy for him because the potential was always there. Yeah. But it was never going to happen in Florida. We had to come to terms with that. And Bill Zito did the best he could because that contract at the time looked awful. That was a horrible situation to have. Mike Matheson I think a lot of it was just mental, had no confidence playing here and desperately needed a change of scenery. So to move him and bring in Patrick Hornquist was such a culture changing move. And it almost didn't happen because of the whole no trade clause situation and the viral picture of Hornquist with his Penguins gear on the curb outside his house, ready for trash day. I mean, there was a lot to that, and it almost didn't come to fruition. But that set a lot in motion. Keith Yandle's buyout. You think the Connolly trade, where Henrik Borgstrom, who now looking back on it, never panned out anywhere he went, but at the time still had a little bit of value and potential, where he was that added trade sweetener to get Connolly's contract off the books. Really good asset management there. The Keith Yandle buyout was huge. And then you can't really look at these moves as a complete win unless you're able to replace them with quality talent. And when Bill Zito was given that tough situation that he walked into and had to trade these guys, he had to replace them with quality talent, or else the Panthers are taking steps back. And the big thing about that was there was no step back. There was a step forward because Bill Zito in that first summer brings in Anthony Duclair for cheap. He brings in Carter Verhaeghe off the free agent pile. He brings in Radko Gudas. You get Patrick Hornquist in a trade. Now that Panthers team lacked depth at the time. That was eventually their undoing in the playoffs. They didn't have a ton of depth because they just didn't have the cap for it. But bringing in those guys on discount rates, Gus Forsling brought in off waivers, like those moves were what really, really built the Panthers up. And then also patching up the defense with a guy like Marcus Nunavara in that offseason. And just some of those really key smart moves to keep the team competitive and bring in some culture changers for cheap. I think that really, really set the wheels in motion and got this thing pointed in the right direction. And then, like you said, leading up to that Tkachuk trade, everything had to align for the Panthers to pull that off. Superstars like that don't always become available. And when they do, you really have to take your big swing at it. And at the time, we never saw that coming because we had just signed Nick Cousins, for example. And the whole talking point was, oh, wow, Huberdeau and Cousins are teammates now after they had their scrap and their little bit of a dust up in a couple of meetings with, and they had been at each other a few times that season. And we're like, oh, wow, they're going to be teammates now. Let's see how that goes. And then Huberdeau's traded. So it really was a move where you had to act fast. He comes available. You have to make it happen. And Bill Zito jumped on it. So smart moves, but also looking back on it, we can't act like Zito inherited a ready-made champion. He had to do a lot of work, and there was some teardown involved.
Yeah, and then Nosek and Tkachuk have to go through that this year with their chirping back and forth.
Yeah, I don't think Tkachuk will be traded anytime soon, so they're going to be teammates.
And let's not forget how he was able to get Montour and Bennett for not a first-round pick neither when they brought him in. So able to use them and utilize them well on this roster. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss more about where the Cup has been lately, because it is continuing its tour overseas, and we're going to discuss the biggest stories throughout its tour at this moment in time. We're going to discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed, and we're driven for the search for better. When it comes to hiring, the best way to search for candidates isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Ditch the busy work and use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. And there's more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners to this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your job more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now to support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. And once again, I'd like to thank you guys all for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day and your second listen of the day. Make sure you listen to Locked On NHL. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL and every day with national experts and local insight on every team in the league. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Back here with Jacob Winans here on another edition of Winans Wednesday here on the show. And now we're going to discuss where the Cup has been lately. Usually we do that for the first segment on the show, but obviously with this being a day in Florida Panthers history, obviously we had to cover the first topic first. So we spoke about Patrick Hornquist getting his first day, his day with the Cup, third time that he has. We spoke about that in the first segment, but more on other guys who have had their days with the Cup. OEL had it in a pack arena in Tingsgrid, I think. Hopefully I'm pronouncing these names correctly. Apologies if I'm not.
They're tough. They are tough.
He had it on Friday afternoon there. Kevin Stenlund brought it to his old club in Tumba, Sweden on Saturday. But some of the coolest stories actually for me that I've seen was Gustav Forsling starting his morning with cinnamon buns for breakfast, took it to a nearby lake to lift the cup, and then over 1,000 people in Saab Arena where he played hockey there. And Jacob, you saw the pictures online of Gustav Forsling with the stage, and obviously if you compare that picture from the parade and looking of all the people back and trying to look at that Stanley Cup, it kind of looks very similar to the amount of people that were at the Panthers parade. Maybe I'm over exaggerating here, but it looked to be a few thousand people there to celebrate Gustav Forsling's championship. And also, let's not forget, he took the cup for a helicopter ride there too. So that was another cool thing that Gustav Forsling did with his day with the cup. So what'd you like most about that?
Gus Forsling, I think, was my favorite one so far out of the Finland Sweden guys. He's a freaking rock star, man. Forsling's so quiet, such a underrated, just goes about his business, doesn't make a whole lot of noise type of player. But seeing his personality off the ice is funny and really awesome. He's that guy, you know. Seeing some of his pictures post game, like the cigar picture when he's laying on the ice bucket, and that's iconic. Looked like an album cover. And then just his support at home in Sweden is super cool. He had a massive crowd there to see him. And, man, you can't really think of a more deserving guy than Gus Forsling. He really did get it the hard way. A guy who was on a couple of teams, given up on 3 times. Vancouver drafts him, never gets to play a game for him before they trade him. Chicago gave up on him, moves him to Carolina. Carolina waives him. It's not a stretch to say if Carolina never waived Gus Forsling, they win a Stanley Cup. I think if Gus Forsling was a part of that Carolina decor over the past couple of years, which he easily could have been, he would have been under team control. Carolina is the Stanley Cup champion, and because of their mistake and giving up on a guy too early, the Panthers are rewarded for that, putting that time in developing him. We talked about it in our group chat, but you never wish for injuries, and you hope every player can be healthy. You want every guy to be able to play all 82. But if Marcus Nunavara never gets hurt a couple years ago, you really don't know if Gus Forsling gets playing time. You don't know if he develops and becomes the defenseman that he is. If Aaron Ekblad doesn't suffer his injury, the leg injury that year, Gus Forsling's minutes may not have been what they were, and he may not have gotten the kind of playoff ice time that he got against Tampa that year. Scored a really clutch goal in Game 4 of that series, so or Game 3 of that series. It's looking back on it, a lot of things had to align the right way for Forsling to become the player that he is now, and the Panthers benefit from it. But you never know who can become a hero, and with injury becomes opportunity, and Gus Forsling took his. And now seeing him get to celebrate that has been so cool, because he deserves it. He got it the hard way. And we're very fortunate that he's part of our team. But another one I really liked is Eetu Luostarinen, and he's been probably my favorite Panther personality since the Cup win. What's his Finnish nickname? It's Flaps Closed. Is that what they call him?
Yeah.
So not even sure I fully understand that yet. I might have to talk to someone from Finland and get the full details on what that all means. But he's been so fun to watch since the Panthers won the Cup, and then seeing him. I don't know if you saw the picture of him just like laying out on a lawn chair. It's like a beach chair, and then the cup is in the chair next to him. They're catching some sun. The cup was getting a tan. I love Eetu Luostarinen personality wise, and also a new husband. So he's winning at life right now.
Yeah, and there was a picture of the wives of his friends too, with the cup around them, and also a Stanley Cup cake with the logo and number 27 of Luostarinen there. That looked as appetizing as some of the cakes of former co-host Josh Licht of the Stanley Cup cake that he got from
that was incredible.
Yeah, so big ups to both of them for the theme cake. And also Nico Mikkola brought his cake, the cup in his part of Finland to the Bobby at Marketplace. And I assume that the Bobbies are nicknames for the police officers there in Finland. I think that's what it was. And then Phil Pritchard also spoke about a first full circle moment for when he first brought the cup to that part of Finland in 1999 for Jiri Lehtonen too. So also really cool moment for him just going around that part of Finland, excuse me. And Lundell also brought it to Helsinki. There's originally an arena that was supposed to sell 2,500 tickets originally sold, but the demand was so high that they sold an extra 900 tickets for him. And Lundell's father, Jan, who played for HIFK, won the Finnish championship in 2011. And Lundell spoke about how that was the first taste of winning for him, on learning what it was like to be in a winning atmosphere and getting that taste for the first time. So and then obviously playing for that franchise, first taste of pro hockey, which made him so ready to easily make that transition. To think that he never played a game in the AHL neither, and was able to just go right in third line center, and then which we know he's eventually going to graduate to second line center, which that gives us an opportunity to transition to segment number 3, which we are going to maybe we'll mention Anton Lundell's name, maybe we won't, on now a topic of why last week we spoke about were the hottest on the Panthers, but now we're going to turn a complete 180, and we're going to discuss whose seats are the safest, whose jobs are the safest on the Florida Panthers. We're going to discuss that more next on Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time, And Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and views from your seat, and the lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. And the priority last-minute deals, you could save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concert, comedy, theater, etc. And the zone deals, you save even more when you choose the section and let Game Time choose the seats. And seat views, you could get a panoramic view from your seat before you buy. And it's the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. And you can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Third and final segment here on this Wednesday, August 7th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Wednesday. So once again, last week we spoke about whose seats were the hottest on the Florida Panthers, and that list excluded Aaron Ekblad because we both agree that his was the hottest. If you want to go back and listen to that one, you can listen to last Wednesday's edition of the show. This week, we are going to discuss our top 5 safest Panthers, whose jobs are the safest going into this season. But I have made one rule for this exercise, is that we had to exclude anyone who had a no move clause in this one, which there are 4 of them, which are Alexander Barkov, Matthew Tkachuk, Sam Reinhart, and Gustav Forsling on the list. So we are going to go through our 5 names here, and I'm going to start with number 5 for me, Jacob, and I'll go 5 and 4 for me, and then you could give your 5 and 4. So number 5 for me is Niko Mikkola for the Panthers. Part of me thinks with some term left on the deal, and if you want to make some type of trade, it's an easy trade to make. However, I think that with the lack of defense help that is coming up through the system, and you're still trying to see what you have with Uvis Balinskis, I think that Niko Mikkola is still a pretty good placeholder for the defense next year and even the year after. And obviously, he led the team in shot blocks. He's a guy in late game situations who obviously can pin near the boards. Obviously, we saw it in the conference final and even in the very last seconds of the clincher for the Panthers. So for him, he is number 5 for me. Number 4, I'm going to say Evan Rodriguez. He was on the list of hottest seats, but I can also see a situation where he's also one of the safest Panthers too, as someone who could go up and down the top 9 in case of an emergency for an injury situation or needing to mix things up as a guy who could play with multiple players too. So 5 and 4, Niko Mikkola and Evan Rodriguez are mine. So 5 and 4 for you, my friend.
Yep. Number 5 for me is actually going to be a little off board, but I'm going to go Matthew Samoskevich. Now, typically I wouldn't put a young guy on this list as a lock because, as we know, prospects get traded quite often. If a bigger fish comes along, prospects are usually the first to go. It's prospects and picks. But I think with the Panthers having won a cup, I don't think they're going to take a massive swing in a trade at any point at the deadline or anything where they would give up their top prospect. So number 5 for me is Matthew Samoskevich. I think the Panthers need a little bit of forward depth. They need some guys with top 6 potential coming up in the ranks, especially having just this lack of first-round picks over the past couple of years. Mackey is the lone one that you've had in the past several drafts. I think he's a guy that Panthers are going to invest in and give a lot of opportunity to. So Mackey is my number 5. I think he's got a long and bright future as a Panther. He's eventually going to be a top 6 forward here. Number 4 for me, I'm actually going to go Carter Verhaeghe. I know we brought him up on our previous list just due to his expiring deal and his potential price tag, but I think he has cemented himself as a Panthers legend. I think he's a guy that with his playoff track record, with his 40-goal season under his belt, his ability to play anywhere in the top 6 and be effective on any line, I think the Panthers are going to find a way to pay him, even if it comes at the expense of Etu or Evan Rodriguez or another bigger trade. to free up cap. I don't think Carter Verhaeghe is going anywhere. I think he's going to end up being a Panther long term. So that's my 5 and 4: Mackey and Carter.
I actually don't have Carter Verhaeghe on my list. He was on my list of hottest based on whether the Panthers could pay him and whether he wants to chase the bag somewhere else. We don't know what's in his head too. But hey, he's also has his own life change too, with him getting married too after that. So who knows what direction that could go for him, and him changing it, him solidifying a place here as that. And you mentioned Mackie Samoskevich. I actually have him on my list, but a little higher, number 3. And I'm going to go more on elaborate more on what you said about Mackie. Not only do they need forward depth and to develop him and winning a championship for him, but also I think of just the next wave of the Panthers window here and there, because they're going to be cap trapped for a little bit right before things start to open up again too for them. So, and he's going to be an RFA coming next season. So no matter what, I believe he's going to get a bridge no matter what happens, because the cap space is going to be the name of the game once again for him. And already 1 season under his belt, having a 20-goal score, you're not gonna see Bill Zito going into desperation mode because needing to win a cup after these last few years. Okay, now it's time to eyes on the present and on the future. So that is a little bit of the mindset for why I think Mackey will be safe for the Panthers, and he won't be part of any deadline moves. He is going to be a part of this mix for the Panthers. Number 2 for me. This one, I know never say never for moving on, but the resume, the cup, the 2 Vezinas, Sergei Bobrovsky has to be up there for the Panthers. I know there's a big cap hit there, but what you brought in for this guy to do to win and solidifying that promise, you take the cap hit on your books for the next 2 years, and you honor a guy. And I think more and more of when Barkov handed Bobrovsky the cup first, before the ceremony for the cup, the first person I was thinking was Ekblad to be the second person to touch the cup. I was thinking that. But then looking back and I see Bobrovsky, the whole culture of hockey of when you win a game, go hug your goalie, and giving him a stick tap too. Every time there's a freezing of the puck, you see a stick tap to the rear end too of his teammates, and just what the goalies go through. Period. Bobrovsky has to be up there, number 2 on the list too. So I think Bobrovsky is safe. So 3 and 2 for you.
Yep, 3 for me is going to be one you already said. It's going to be Nico Mikkola. I think he's cost effective. He's cheap, and he can play on your second pair, and he can play on your third pair if you get an upgrade at some point in the next 2 years. I think he does his job to a T. He's textbook, show up, come to work, block shots, play defense. And every once in a while, he'll surprise you, and he'll jump into the rush, and he'll score a goal against Edmonton. Specifically Edmonton, though. He doesn't score against anyone else, just Edmonton, if you look at his goals from this year. But I think Nico Mikkola is locked in. I don't think he's going anywhere for the next 2 seasons. I think he's going to play out his contract here. And what a bargain signing that the Panthers get. We knew it was going to be tough to replace Radko Gudas and what he brings. But Nico Mikkola was a fantastic addition at a really nice cap hit. Yeah, he was awesome. And I think when he does play out these final 2 years with the Panthers, I think he probably moves on after that, because he will get a significant pay raise somewhere else, and rightfully so. But he's become a culture setter. He's become a glue guy. He's perfect role player. And with the Panthers having some transition now on their blue line, Brendan Montour is gone. It's going to be some overhaul, and you don't think Ekblad's going to get that long-term deal. This blue line's going to look very different the next couple of years. I think Mikkola is a guy who's going to help that transition. I don't think he goes anywhere. And number 2 for me is going to be Anton Lundell. I was tempted to put him at number 1. I was really, really close to putting him at number 1. He's going to be number 2 for me. The only possible thing that I could see derailing him having a very long career here in Florida is if the offensive game doesn't quite develop and come around. But I don't foresee that happening. I think he eventually becomes a 60-point scorer, maybe more than that. I could very easily see him being a 30 and 30 type of player. That's not out of the realm of possibility. And his two-way game is fantastic. I think the Panthers showed a ton of confidence in him. I think he's on Bill Zito's good side forever because he was the first pick in the Bill Zito era. I think as the youngest guy on the team coming in and playing such a huge role in winning a Stanley Cup, it's almost like in the NFL when you talk about you got to win the Super Bowl on your quarterback's rookie contract. Anton Lundell comes in and the Panthers win a cup while Anton Lundell's on his rookie deal before he ever got that pay raise. And that's huge. Being able to have that on your resume, winning a cup on your ELC, that's tough to do. And it's not like he was a passenger. He was a huge part in this. So I think he's earned the trust of the team. I think he's earned the trust of management. I think he's going to be around here for a very, very long time. And I think he eventually becomes the 2C.
Especially moving up there after game 2 of round 1 all the way until game 2 of the second round when Bennett was out due to that taking a shot from Marin Montour onto his hand too. And every time there's always an injury, he's always the first one too. So that's not going to stop anytime soon for the Panthers. And eventually he's going to get to that for the Panthers. So that's why for me he is my number 1 because he is signed long term for the Panthers. It's going to be Barkov and Lundell 1 and 2 there for the centers. And obviously everywhere he's gone, whether it's World Juniors, Liga, it's always been an improvement up. Always the guy's willing to learn and then have guys take under his wing. Like he roomed with Barkov even for a little bit just to, and the guy's like a sponge whenever it comes to like learning more about the game too. And every time he's had to step up, and even the quote that Paul Maurice says, I don't know what Anton Lundell is specifically going to look like a year from now, but damn, I am excited. So you're number 1, Jacob.
Yeah, and real quick on Lundell, that's a really good point that you brought up about him being able to learn and adapt. Yes, he learned from Barkov. He learned in the Finnish league when people questioned whether he could ever develop an offensive game, and he ends up leading his team in scoring as an underager. And coming over, learning from Barkov, and then learning from Reinhart and Marchment on that line as a rookie. And then when Tarasenko gets traded, openly talks about how Tarasenko is the smartest hockey guy he had ever been on a line with, and he was so excited to learn from him. And you could see that pay dividends in his playoff performance. So I think that's his biggest quality is his willingness to learn. But my number 1 is one you already said. It's Sergei Bobrovsky for me. Now, obviously, this may be a somewhat unpopular answer given his cap hit and the fact that Spencer Knight is waiting in the wings. But I think with Bob and Knight's term being equal, I don't see Bob losing his job, and I think the Panthers are going to do right by him. He's played out 5 of his 7 years. The early mixed bag is way in the past. He's a Stanley Cup champion. He was a Vezina finalist this year. He's not really slowing down with age. He's been remarkably healthy as a Panther. And that's something that can't be overstated. Most goalies at that age are starting to break down a little bit, starting to rack up some injuries, some time on IR. We saw it with Luongo. We've seen this happen with goaltenders all across the league. Tuukka Rask started to break down at a similar age. Bob keeps himself in incredible shape, doesn't miss games, maintains his body extremely well, and you see that because his play doesn't really dip. So I think regardless of what these next 2 years look like for him, the Panthers are going to do right by him. He's going to play out these last 2 years of his contract as a Panther. I'd be a little bit surprised if he plays another NHL game after those 2 years. I think being the family guy he is, I wouldn't be shocked if he calls it a career at the end of those 2 years. And that would be incredible to see him retire as a Panther. But at the very least, he will be a Panther for the next 2 years. The Panthers have a culture of doing right by their players if the players do right by them. And Bob has been first class.
Yeah, and when you look back at even when Hornquist was even before Hornquist went on IR for his concussions, they did right by him by keeping around in the organization. And even when he had a high cap hit, the leadership that he brought, they were doing right by him by still keeping him even in the mix.
Refused to trade him when they easily could have to free up cap space. Refused to trade him.
Yeah, so credit to Bill Zito on always making it right by them. But Jacob, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, another successful Winans Wednesday edition of the show. Tell everybody where they can follow you online, my friend.
Yep, you can follow me on X at Jacob Winans 8, and thanks for having me as always.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week, my friend.
Looking forward to it.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on Locked On NHL Network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone, and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Jacob Winans, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.